who actually advises Putin? How does he get his information? Who are the people that he actually listens to?
Yeah, so as he's gone on in power, has become entrenched in power, his inner circle is basically kind of shrunk and he's become more isolated. There's all these security service people that are basically in his inner circle, like Patrushev and the Siloviki, the security services people. And they're loyal and they're basically yes men, right? And this is what happens over time with these personalist regimes is the inner circle starts to shrink and it starts to become more homogenous. And of course, COVID didn't help here. Putin basically isolated himself even more. Very few people got to see him. I think he just a couple of weeks ago, he lifted the restriction where everybody had to wait to meet with him in quarantine for several days. He did that way longer than any other leader. He just stopped doing that recently. So he was basically placed into self-isolation, talking to people who will not challenge him, who will not challenge his assumptions. And that's a very dangerous feedback loop because that inner circle that I'm talking about, those security people, they see the West as an existential threat, which of course pushes them and Putin to be more belligerent towards the West, which validates the hawks, right? And this around it goes. So I think that's essentially what happened. That he's become increasingly isolated and talking to people who are supremely paranoid, and he feeds off of that paranoia. And I think that drives a lot of decision making, especially over the past few years.
Yeah. So, I mean, people always debate this point about the rationality of Putin, right? And I agree that he is rational, but within the system in which he operates. So by our standards, he looks irrational, but that's because we're in a very different situation than he is. And the information that we get is also very different. When you look at his conduct now, as it pertains to the war in Ukraine, what do you think motivates him? Like, is this primarily about regime survival? Is it about advancing Russia's national interest? Is it about his place in the history books? What does he want?
Well, I think a lot of it is he sees his legacy as helping Russia recover from the Soviet collapse, right? Which he has said is the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the last century. And so when you have a regime that's essentially an extension of a leader's psyche, which is what we have in the personalist regime, his personal grievances, his historical grievances, essentially become national policy, right? There's no daylight between what he believes, what grievances he personally has, versus what Russia does. And, this is very different from ordinary autocracy. Like, you can have a brutal autocracy that still has deliberation among the elites of some kind. Like, you think about Brezhnev, USSR under Brezhnev, that's obviously a sclerotic, autocratic institution, but it's a collective decision-making one, right? Or China after Mao, right? Explicitly designed to prevent one-man rule, or or even military juntas in Latin America, where they rotate power or require some kind of agreement between branches. Personalists get rid of all of that, right? So you get these informational bubbles, you get rulers surrounding themselves with yes men, and they make these decisions based on personal fixations and not coherent national interest. So I think for Putin, it was a combination of factors. One is desire to secure his legacy, and I think his sincere belief that Ukraine is part of Russia and that most Ukrainians would welcome Russian presence. There was a new piece by Sean Walker, I don't know if you had a chance to see that, on the decision-making before the invasion began, and they thought that maybe a small percentage of Ukrainians would fight back. They did not anticipate this widespread resistance. And again, if you believe that only a small fraction will fight back, maybe it's rational to invade. So it's not about Putin being rational or irrational. It's what is the information he's getting from the system he's built? And how limited is that information, and how sort of cherry-picked is that information? And it's very much so. And that's why I think not just Putin with Ukraine, but historically speaking, dictators keep making these kinds of mistakes that seem absolutely dumb to us from the outside, but kind of make sense when you look at it from their prism, the way they get these facts fed to them selectively. I think that explains a lot of the initial optimism that Putin had going into the war, and why he thought this was going to be, I think he sincerely thought this was going to be his greatest achievement. Now, when it comes to now, I think it's just sort of acquired an inertia of its own, where he sees the victory in Ukraine as a sort of a really important goal, probably the most important goal, and he's willing to risk all those things we talked about, the million casualties, the economic isolation. He's willing to risk all of that if that means getting what he wants in Ukraine. And so I don't see for that reason any short-term prospects for peaceful resolution. Putin, by the way, is still getting fed bad information, right? We see the press conferences where the generals are talking about towns that they've conquered that have not been conquered. And so we know he's still getting this filtered information, which impacts how he sees the war going. And so, he probably still thinks that they're doing well, that he can win this thing. And that's another reason why he doesn't really have a big incentive to stop anytime soon.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic, right? Because you build this system all around yourself. You eliminate all of these other institutions in order to expand your power. But then gradually you almost become so successful that you kneecap yourself because you no longer get accurate information. And it makes it much more likely that you make these catastrophic mistakes.